voting is violent. Crazy. Crazy, right? Who says that? Voting? Like, people, what, you just go into a booth and choose who you want to vote for? Like, how is that violence, right? It doesn't make any sense. But it is. Because guess what? What you're voting for is ultimately violence. 90% of the time. Sure, there's time, I'm guilty of this. I've voted in these elections, and I will probably continue to vote in elections. Mostly to stop more violence from happening. But anyway, voting is an act of violence. Because when you vote, you put a politician in, or if you're going to vote and you vote no on something that victimizes somebody, because the state, the only way they can make money is by victimizing somebody, taking their money, and then very rarely defending rights, property rights, or they're going to violate someone's property rights, which is most of the time. Because most laws are violations of property rights. Because there are very few, because property rights are the only law that should exist. The natural rights of property rights are the only real rights that exist. All other rights, there's no such thing as healthcare rights. Human rights don't exist, that's not a thing. And you might be like, what? Human rights don't exist? No. It's just property rights. You are the extension. You are your own. You own your body. And everything you create and buy or freely acquire through voluntary means is your property and you own it. Anything that you do that is non-consensual to somebody else is a violation of their property rights, their bodily autonomy, and their property that they worked for. And at the end of the day, when you vote, you're voting for somebody to violate other people's property rights, unless their only purpose is to reduce the government, the state, as much as possible. And that's why, my friends, I don't vote. I probably shouldn't vote, but I'm voting only to stop. I mean, it was like, oh, you have to vote to stop. I mean, I don't really have to vote at all. It's more about culturally convincing people to not violate other people's rights. Voting is kind of like a last resort effort to stop something, when really it all starts in school, in media, in where else? Entertainment. All of culture is what really matters. But school, in the political system is the last place anything matters, because no one enforces these old laws that don't like it. Like if culturally people are like, we don't care about that law, don't enforce that. We're not going to enforce that. If it becomes too costly to enforce, they're not going to do it anymore. There's books about old laws, and you can go on the internet and look for old laws that people don't enforce anymore. So it's all cultural. It's all about convincing people culturally to not be violent, to solve differences consensually, and not steal from each other and try to force an ideology that isn't reality on other people. Like, you don't want to force your ideology on other people. That's just going to create conflict and create even more problems. Instead, we need to decentralize and allow people to make communities that that share values. So you can have liberal people over in one area, and conservative people in another area, and traditionalists and even if people want to have an area of just their race or just their gender or just, whatever, that's how you solve for these conflicts that don't need to happen because they're trying to use the ring of power on each other instead of just leaving each other alone, which is what needs to happen. Everyone needs to leave each other alone so we don't have all this conflict for no reason. So there you go. Don't vote. Voting is bad. Convince people culturally, be persuasive, and that's how. And you raise your kids peacefully, with integrity. Uh, and you just be the standard that your kids look up to. And you can pass your standards, your values on to them, and that is how you create culture, and then they can go out in the world and do the same thing. And that's why these left-wing people who don't have kids they are screwed. The only way they have their values are going through is because of these public schools, and those need to be abolished ASAP. Thanks for listening to the rant. See you next time.